If you analyze the anatomy of the experiments in Poppy Playtime, you begin to notice some very interesting details. For example, Huggy Wuggy has a slow digestive system, especially because of his size. Catnap has organs, intestines, and internal anatomy, but apparently it doesn't need to eat or perform many of the biological functions a human does. That raised a question for me. If Playtime Co wanted to create perfect organisms, what did they do about annoying functions like going to the bathroom? Playtime Co was a company obsessed with efficiency. The Bigger Bodies initiative was created to eliminate problems. So it wouldn't make much sense for them to build giant monsters and then spend every day manually cleaning up their waste. And yes, I know it's a pretty ridiculous question, but it actually leads to a very interesting explanation. Ever since Chapter 4 of Poppy Playtime, right before reaching the prison, we got our first look at a bathroom. Yes, experiments use bathrooms. It's the one where we find Riley and her journal. So, clearly those bathrooms served a purpose. Maybe Catnap or even the prototype doesn't have biological needs anymore, but others probably do. Because so far we know that some experiments, or rather almost all of them, eat food, digest it, absorb nutrients, and whatever remains should eventually become waste. And up to that point, nothing seems unusual. But then, what? How would Poppy Playtime explain that part? Well, there's a difference between experiments producing waste and what Playtime Co actually did with it afterward. And the craziest thing is that I wasn't the only one asking this question. Ever since the prison bathrooms appeared, a lot of people started wondering the exact same thing. What happened with the waste? What did Playtime Co do with all of it? Well, I think I have the answer. The poppy flowers. Chapter 5 revealed how important these flowers are to the entire story. We even got to see massive fields of them. But if we look at it from a more scientific perspective, poppies are very unusual plants. They're quite different from many ornamental plants we're familiar with. For example, an orchid can be incredibly delicate and die from even small environmental changes. Poppies are much tougher than that. And there are many different varieties of poppies, and several of them can grow even in fairly harsh conditions. What's interesting is that Playtime Co specifically chose this type of plant for its experiments. And it actually makes a lot of sense, because if the company relied on poppies for part of its research, the logical choice would be a plant that could be grown in huge quantities and survive for long periods of time. Even then, not all of them survived. As we explore the factory, we can find some poppies that look perfectly healthy, and others that are clearly withering away, which tells us that someone was constantly trying to keep these crops alive. They need nutrients, maintenance, light, and honestly, they're basically like any plant that decides to die just because it's having a bad day. But getting back to those enormous poppy fields we saw in Chapter 5, keeping them alive underground would be incredibly difficult. So, where was Playtime Co getting enough nutrients to keep them healthy and thriving? Well, this is where the interesting part of this very strange question begins. In the real world, there's something extremely common. Let's say you want to grow a massive crop of something. If that's the goal, you're gonna need fertilizer. And that's how you get the best results. Well, animals produce waste, and that waste can be turned into fertilizer. Plants use that fertilizer, grow, and the cycle continues. In fact, this is something that happens every day in agriculture. Organic waste is processed, converted into compost, and later used to nourish new crops. It's a completely normal cycle. That's when I started wondering if Playtime Co was doing the exact same thing inside the factory. There may have actually been some kind of connected system. The experiments used the bathrooms, the waste was sent to a processing area, and there it was transformed into organic fertilizer that was later used to feed the poppy fields. And honestly, that idea doesn't sound all that far-fetched. We've seen just how massive the factory is, along with the enormous rooms hidden throughout it. It wouldn't be surprising if there was an entire section dedicated to processing waste from the experiments. And to support that idea, let's remember these documents that contains orders for cultivation materials. Among them, we can find fertilizer and organic compounds. What still leaves me with question is that we don't know whether all of it was purchased or if some of it was being produced internally. And really, I don't think a company like Playtime Co would simply let that material go to waste. We're talking about a company that turned people into giant experiments. So it's hard to imagine them throwing away something that could be reused for another purpose. But here's something to think about. If the company was constantly buying tons and tons of fertilizer, sooner or later people would start asking questions. Why would a toy factory need that much fertilizer? It's not like the toys grow out of the ground. And that's where we reach the darkest part of this theory, because it'll mean that Playtime Co had created a perfect cycle. The experiments produced the waste helped keep the poppies alive, and the poppies ultimately played a role in creating new experiments, which means the experiments themselves would be helping create more experiments, over and over again, never stopping, a cycle of suffering that continuously fed itself. And for anyone thinking that fertilizer only comes from certain animals, like cows, that's not entirely true. Scientifically, there are methods for converting treated human waste into fertilizer as well. And if we remember, the experiments contained human organs just inside toy bodies. So from a biological standpoint, this theory isn't actually that absurd. So yes, after this video we've learned that many experiments do eat. They have digestive systems, they go to the bathroom, and the prison bathrooms seem to point directly toward all of that. But there's still no definitive proof that those specific waste products were being used for the poppy fields. Maybe Playtime Co used them for something else entirely. And I also don't think every experiment functioned the same way. Because if there's one thing Poppy Playtime has taught us, it's that every experiment was designed differently. Some seem to retain far more biological functions than others. Catnap, for example, is very different from Huggy Wuggy, and both of them are completely different from many of the other experiments we've encountered throughout the factory. That's why I don't think they all produce the same amount of waste, or require the exact same type of maintenance. The only thing that seems clear is that Playtime Co had to find some way to deal with this problem. Or maybe not. You tell me what you think. And by the way, would you like to see more videos about the anatomy of Poppy Playtime experiments? Because as we saw in this video, Huggy Wuggy's anatomy is completely different from Catnap's. Also, I'm not entirely sure whether I've already uploaded the Springtrap anatomy video by the time you're watching this video, so keep an eye out for that one as well. And if you'd like to see anatomy videos covering other characters from other games, series, movies, or anything else, let me know down in the comments.